Just two things before we start this video. Thanks to all my Ko-Fi supporters. You really helped me out on making these videos. If you want to do that as well, kofi.com/Obsidus. Link in the description. And second, this is again an opinion vlog that's more or less scripted. So it's more just me babbling around. There will be nothing important except gameplay on the screen, so you can just keep that in the background like a podcast. Alright, enjoy the video. Let's talk about resources and power creep for a little bit. Most resources in games are kinda obvious, like money, wood or stone in RTS games that you need to spend to build stuff. Or in shooter games like Valorant we have bullets or HP. That's kinda obvious, right? There are less obvious ones, like building space and vision in RTS games. And also like controlled space in shooter games. And then there are resources that nobody would consider resources in the first glance, but if you think about it, it actually makes sense. For example, movement speed. While movement speed is kinda an unreasonable resource at first glance, it actually makes sense. There's a reason why, for example, ship speed is important for Anor, because you need your resources at the right location at the right time. The faster, the better. The same goes for Valorant. If you can't move in time, you are at a disadvantage. That's why agents like Jet, Raze, Neon or even Chamber, and yes, teleport is also a form of movement, are kinda popular compared to agents or characters that don't have that movement. In DBD, movement speed at first glance is kinda regulated. Survivors are mostly running at 4 meters per second, most killers at 4.6. Some at 4.4 and Nurse at 3.8, but yeah, she can teleport. And still there's a killer whose concept is 100% built around movement speed. And I'm not talking about Legion, I'm talking about Clown. Clown deals with movement speed. He reduces the one of survivors with the purple bottles and gives himself and survivors a buff on the yellow bottles. And still nobody takes that into consideration as a resource. And while movement speed as a resource is fine, at the moment we experience something in Dead by Daylight that's called the power creep of the resource movement speed. To explain power creep real quick, power creep means that there are newly released parts of content that can be characters, perks, abilities, even items that change the flow of the game in a way that makes the old one redundant. You can see that quite well in, for example, League of Legends. Many of the old champions had to be reworked because the new ones are a lot faster, stronger, better, whatever. And therefore the old ones couldn't keep up. You notice that especially if you compare a currently released champion versus an original one. If you compare one of the abilities of, for example, Seri, it looks like it's as stuffed as all 5 abilities of Anivia. If you don't know these characters, don't worry, we don't need to go into much detail about this, but it's similar on Dead by Daylight. If you look at the skill set of Vecna, compare this to the original 3 or 4 killers. If you compare Vecna to the original 3 or 4 killers, you have the feeling that if you take Trapper, Wrath, Hillbilly and Huntress and or Nurse together, you are roughly at the same skill set that Vecna has on its own. Vecna is not per se overpowered because of this, but it's of course a sort of power creep that the old ones can't keep up with the new one, even though Wrath and especially Nurse are still considered strong killers at the moment. And yes, some people will fight me in Wrath. So why is that increase of movement speed dangerous or a problem for the game? On first glance, obviously, perks on their own look fine. Background player is as fine as light or sprint burst is. Batteries included or rapid brutality give you a certain amount of movement speed, but you have to pay a price. For batteries included, it's that generators need to be done. For rapid brutality, you lose bloodlust completely. And looking at every single one of these changes on its own, it's fine. But if you zoom out a little bit and look at the bigger picture, it's a nightmare for many reasons. At the moment there are so many movement speed abilities that as a killer you have to guess which one the survivors actually bring. This one has light maybe, or is it sprint burst, or do they run background player? and you just saw them running because you just picked somebody up? Or was it a sprint burst away from the generator because they wanted to flashlight save the survivor? It's super difficult to point these things out sometimes, because sometimes you need to see them twice or even thrice to actually know what's going on there. And there's another point where this is a problem, because behavior's design philosophy at the moment is like, if you don't know what to do, just take movement speed, I guess. Deliver us haste or deliver us hindrance. I'll give you an example. The iridescent photocard on Trickster was set to expose survivors after 4 or more hits, so you could down them with an M1 immediately. On Trickster rework, this was changed to a haste add-on. The Huntress was reworked to have it easier for survivors to pick her up, so instead of 5 base headshots, she got 7. I'm just sitting here editing this and realized I said survivors picking up the Huntress, but I meant beginners picking up the Huntress. I'm sorry. And then people realized with the additional belts you could go up to 10 headshots, which apparently was too much for behavior, so they reworked it. But instead of giving it something that gives variation to the Hunter's play, you got 2 haste add-ons. Similar to the Clown, he got more base kit bottles, and the bottles add-ons were changed to movement speed affecting add-ons. Why is this a bad thing? First of all, the maps are not designed for that much movement speed. The loops in Dead by Daylight are designed to be run at the relative base movement speed. For survivors, that's 4 meters per second. For killers, that's 4.6 meters per second. 4.4 is not as difficult, but you get the idea. The loops, the pellets, the safe areas, everything is designed for that base movement speed. The tiles are just taken over to new realms or only slightly edited. So therefore you have a huge deal in terms of movement speed, set pace of the gameplay. In the past, survivors had mostly sprint burst and light to get movement speed. For example, sprint burst would have been used to go from a generator to a safe place, or light could have been used to jump through a window and go from one pallet or jungle gym, whatever, to another one. These were meant to be connectors in my opinion, and most people, especially in high MMR, use them like this. Others, like background player, are designed to outplay the killer, and giving variation on outplaying the killer is fine on itself. You can stand outside of the killer's terror radius, outside of his range, outside of any of his abilities, and as soon as he picks up, you can sprint burst, you can background player speed style thing-ish to the killer and blind him, or drop a flashbang, or drop a pellet, or whatever suitable to rescue the survivor that just got picked up. And again, on its own it's fine, but in the bigger picture, yeah, there are many problems on this. First of all, killers don't really have counterplay against haste, except they have it built into the kit. There are a few that have it in the kit, like as mentioned Clown, or maybe even Legion at a certain degree. Nurse obviously as well, because she can teleport. Spirit is also kinda easy on that. Blight obviously, but there is no real counterplay in terms of, hey, you got this ability, so I have something else to counter it. If you take it to a comparison to other things, survivors can pretty much easily counter killers in many occasions at the moment. For example, Distortion takes out 20 of the killer's perks, and you can't do anything against it. 20 perks that allow you to aura read survivors are completely useless because of one single perk. And if you run Distortion combined with Calm Spirit, you can double that amount. Then roughly 40 perks are completely useless. The only intel perks that still work are Discordance, Whispers, and to a certain degree Surveillance. That's it. So at the moment we are in a situation where survivors have movement speed and they can hide pretty well from killers. As a killer, there is one thing left to do, because you don't have many perks that do something else than aura reading or detecting survivors by any other means or giving you a slight buff. But there are general aggression perks. Of course, there are also some other perks like Knockout or Forced Hesitation or Franklin's. Honestly, except for very niche builds or certain combinations, these don't do much. And also, especially Knockout or Forced Hesitation are not perks that are like frequently used and you gain a lot of value from them, because survivors need to be close to each other, and against most killers you try to split up. So therefore, chain regression perks are basically everything that's left. But I'm drifting off here. Having that many sources of haste is really terrible. Not because each single one on itself would be bad, but there are so many situations that per map design should be safe for a survivor that suddenly aren't, because haste or hindrance actually killed them. It doesn't even need to mean that the killer has haste, but the amount of people that I saw running around certain structures or jungle gyms or objects and just run into my face because I backtrack and they didn't see me because of high walls, and they just run into me because they used some haste perk like light or so, is incredible. Same goes for hindrance, but there are far less hindrance perks than haste perks in the game. So yeah, on itself, every single perk of these that give you haste, on both killer and survivor side, is fine. But the sheer amount of how many haste perks we have at the moment is troublesome, at least in my opinion. The design philosophy from behavior to just stuff up everything that's not really in use, giving it haste, I'm not sure if that's a good idea. Same, for example, was Shadowborn. If you're blinded, you get 10% haste for 10 seconds. Because the FOV field was put into the options into a slider. So instead of doing something actually useful, we get haste while we are blind, which we can't use. The same, by the way, is true for the Huntress add-ons that were changed. You gain 2 or 3% haste for 5 seconds after you hit the headshot. You lose 2 seconds of that already, because you put down your headshot and until you gain your normal movement speed again, and then you have 3 seconds left. The point is, if you injure a survivor, then injured survivors have 150% movement speed because the injured damage boost, so they get away anyways. The 2 or 3% don't help you, even if you combine them on 5%, that doesn't help you. And if you down a survivor, well, you don't need the 5% either, because they are downed, they can't get away. And the amount of times, like where the last gen is done and they suddenly get up because of adrenaline, and you could have picked them up half a second earlier because of the 5% haste, that's too niche, let's be honest. Similar for Clown. And while the photo card on Trickster, for example, could be discussed as an actual strong add-on for a different playstyle, as a Trickster main, I'm not really fond of that, even though I didn't play Trickster for a while now, because it changes the playstyle of Trickster in a way that's not meant to be played as the Trickster. If you want to have more movement speed to chase survivors, as mentioned, Legion would be the better chase. And also Legion has a yellow add-on that gives you 0.3 meters per second movement speed per hit during your Feral Frenzy, which is more than the knives can give you overall. Yeah, there are better options if you want to play movement speed based killers than Trickster. While haste isn't a big problem on its own at the moment still, we are going in a direction that will make it a really big problem over the next 2 or 3 chapter releases, or maybe reworks even. Because in the last AMA on July 3rd, Behavior said that they plan a huge meta shakeup for fall this year again. So I expect even more haste perks then. And I'm afraid of that, because more haste means that there are more unsafe places around the map. That means that survivors and killers alike have better ways to outrun the other side. And that means that the game will be faster and faster and faster every single time. And I guess that's not a way where an asymmetrical horror game should be ending up. What do you think about haste at the moment, and is it really a problem for you as it is for me? Do you see what I mean when I say, okay, it will be an even bigger problem in the future if we don't stop that now? I mean, Behavior won't listen, let's be honest, but what do you think? Leave your comments and your opinions in the description, and of course like this video if you haven't. Have a lovely day and see you in the next one.